explore the role that digital platforms can play in helping to limit global climate change to 1.5C. And we're pleased to have a really extraordinary panel of experts to help us think through and learn about these issues. So I'm going to take a few minutes just to introduce them and to set a bit of context. And then we'll kick off with a few questions that I'll pose to the panelists, and then take your questions from the floor. So please keep note of your questions and don't hesitate to put questions into the chat as we go along. We'll be reviewing those and try to get to as many of them as possible. So I'll start with the introduction of the panelists. Peter Browning, you raise your hand, Peter, so everyone will recognize you there on the screen. CEO of Browning Environmental Communications, the world's leading communications consultancy specializing in environmental issues. Peter's firm works with a very diverse set of clients, from NGOs like our own at our RMI, WWF, Carbon War Room, CDP, as well as industrial clients like Daewoo and Maersk, in creating creative and credible communications campaigns. So Peter has a wide range of experience in this space and in understanding kind of the evolving set of media tools and approaches to target audiences. Cassie Flynn is the strategic advisor on climate change to the United Nations Development Program, where she leads a 30-person team within UNDP's Global Policy Network. She's the creator of Mission 1.5, an app that uses mobile gaming technology to educate people about climate options and to communicate those results to the relevant policymakers and decision makers in the corresponding jurisdictions where the participants are engaged. The results are analyzed in a partnership with Oxford University, and it's really quite an extraordinary thing to have such a global approach, reaching millions of people around the world in, I think, at least 6 different languages that I'm aware of. So Cassie will tell us a little bit more about how to build a global platform. And Ingmar Rentzhog, founder and CEO of We Can't Wait, a dedicated social media platform that is working to address climate change by providing feedback to leaders and companies on their climate-related actions. Launched in 2017, We Can't Wait is a crowd-funded app that allows people to share ideas on climate action and provide feedback to leaders and companies on climate-related policies and actions. So we have a combination of experts and practitioners and innovators in this panel. We're excited to extend this conversation and think together about what it means for the future. I want to say, just by way of context, I think this is an extraordinary moment for this conversation. First of all, I think we know from the rigorous studies that have been done by many leading institutions that limiting climate change to just 1.5C will require both swift and extraordinary actions by a very wide range of actors, from citizens to governments to corporations to financiers. And we're not going to get there by incremental or linear change. So we're reaching for points in the system that are subject to disruptive or that are tipping points, that are the points where we might see extraordinary change. And that's one of the reasons that we turn to social media to think about it as a powerful tool. Even this year, with COVID-19 having put much of the global economy in an induced coma for parts of the year, we are likely only to see greenhouse gas emissions on the order of 5 to 7% for the year as a whole. And yet we know that we'll have to see emissions reductions at that pace on a sustained basis to 2030 and beyond if we're really going to constrain climate change to less than 1.5C. So the challenge is a formidable one, but not an insurmountable one. In 2020, we have also seen a dose of climate reality that is, I think, having impacts around the world. It's the combination of fires and floods and hurricanes and a preview of what some of the worst consequences of disruptive climate change can look like. It's having an impact on people around the world that is direct and consequential. As one of the commentators here in the US said recently, Californians are thinking today about the summer of 2020, August 2020, as the hottest in the last 20 years, but it might be one of the coolest in the next 20 years. And that reality is beginning to dawn on people and beginning to affect the foundation of how we think about the reality of climate change and climate action. So all this sets the stage for us to think about how we can use the world's most powerful communications and engagement tools to inspire and activate climate action on the front lines. And that's where our three panelists bring experience with those tools and some of the best practices, and are at the learning edge of what we're seeing in the world. So I want to start with you, Peter, partly because you have such a wide range and depth of experience across a lot of different approaches, and just ask if you'll say a few words about how you would characterize today's state of the art in using digital tools to inspire and activate climate action, and maybe set a little context around how did we get here and what have we learned so far? Peter?
Well, thank you, James. Yeah, I think the context is very important because we have got a big shift in context with COVID. And I also think that we're seeing, there was a survey out at the beginning of this week which showed, I think it from GlobeScan, which showed that perhaps 90% of people worldwide believed in climate change. So I think that we have a very interesting context where there's an acceleration of the move towards digital. So digital platforms become more powerful. And then you have an awareness that there is a problem that needs solving. So I think that is very, very important. In terms of what are the real success factors, I think, for big campaigns, I think, and the state of the art, I think the key is really to be focused in your campaign efforts in a very traditional way. So I've been in this business for 20 years, and even in the days before I was able to work on environmental issues, a successful campaign was about awareness, it was about trust, it was about engagement. And I think that those tools, which are very effective at generating those things in audiences, are what, where the state of the art is. So I think in awareness, then social platforms are incredibly powerful. There are amazing influencers who have got fantastic reach. I think on the engagement side, then people are getting very sophisticated at turning audience engagement into new consumer behaviors, which shift towards low carbon pathways. I think what's really different about the climate action space is the issue of trust. And there's a great big community of people who know a lot about climate action. And if you get things wrong, then you've got to make sure that then you can be in real trouble. And we see it all the time that brands haven't fully checked out with experts what they're saying and run into trouble. So I think those are the sort of success factors of a great digital campaign.
Cassie.
James, we lost you briefly there.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Great. I want to turn to Cassie and ask, because she's been on the front lines of innovation here, for a little perspective on what, on how Mission 1.5 came to be and what your experience with it is. It's obviously from the perspective of, as I said before, of creating a campaign that has global reach, something of really, it's an extraordinary exception and a great start. So congratulations on that. And what can you tell us about kind of how it's going and what you've learned so far?
Thank you, James, and it's such a pleasure to be here and to be a part of this discussion. And yes, we're quite proud of Mission 1.5. Mission 1.5 really set out to help to connect, and as Peter was saying, in the climate space, there's a vast amount of knowledge and a vast amount of expertise that is happening. And forgive the sirens, New York City is alive and well behind me. But this idea that there's this moment now where people are looking around, they are seeing the impacts of climate change, they are scared, they are worried, and they want to be able to start talking about solutions. And Mission 1.5 really set out to say, okay, how can we have a meaningful conversation about solutions and bridge this community of people that are demanding action with world leaders that really have to make these decisions in a very quick amount of time. And so what Mission 1.5 set out to do was to use sort of gaming technology to make this bridge and to ask people essentially in the course of a video game to say, what would you do if you were the most powerful person in your country? What would you do to tackle climate change? And we are working with some fantastic pollsters out of Oxford to compile a lot of this information and make this available to world leaders as they are making these decisions. And the idea, sort of going back to this fantastic framework that Peter mentioned about awareness, trust, and engagement, is the idea is that we are using this gaming technology to be able to build better awareness, to have increased trust, and then also to give this engagement in a way that helps give a direct voice to people, to the world leaders. So we're in the middle of it now. We've had some really good momentum, and we're aiming to have some good results by the end of the year, by the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement.
Great. Can you say a little bit about kind of the scale of response you've had so far, and kind of what you expect the trajectory to be for that, in terms of reaching audiences in different parts of the world?
Yeah, certainly. And when you're at the United Nations and you start talking about video games, I must admit, people kind of look at you with a raised eyebrow and say, what's happening here? And so we really wanted to approach this from a really innovative perspective, and from a let's try this. Let's try to be as sort of agile as we could in the context with which the world is evolving. And when we first started thinking about Mission 1.5, certainly COVID was nowhere in our thinking. And so we have had to adapt in real time. And so we first started testing in the UK. We put out a test of this initial game, and how it works is you can go to mission1.5.org. That's word mission, number 1, word point, number 5.org. And you can play a game and then you can vote, or you can get it as an ad in other games. Because one thing that we really wanted to do was, we all know about sort of putting up new websites and putting up new sort of guidance notes or briefing notes. What we wanted to do was to try to reach a bigger audience. And with Mission 1.5, with the gaming industry, we started taking a look at, well, there's 2.7 billion gamers in the world. And it's not just people that are sort of what we think of as serious gamers that have lots of equipment and are serious in it, but it's also, a lot of us that, on our phones playing Angry Birds, playing Candy Crush, playing all of these other games that really access this huge audience. And so what we wanted to do is put climate change and put Mission 1.5 to that audience. And so that we put it in as an ad within Angry Birds and within Candy Crush and some of these very popular games. We tested that in the UK, and the results really blew us away. We reached really millions of people in just through this ad alone. And so what we're trying to do is to scale that up and to make that available in countries globally, so that everyone can have this voice on climate.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. Well, Ingmar, you've been at the forefront as an innovator in this space, creating a dedicated platform related to climate change. Tell us a little bit about what you've learned so far from that process, and I think this audience would be interested to know the lessons you're extracting that are generalizable, that might tell us something about how digital tools can be used to simulate climate action in general.
Yes, thanks, James. Yes, my organization name is We Don't Have Time, not We Can't Wait, but the message is the same. We don't have time to wait. Actually, I founded We Don't Have Time because social media don't work for the climate. Most social media are either working against us because they represent heavy economical interest, or the algorithm is not care about the environment. The algorithm just needs attention about a lot of causes. So it's a big problem with general social media today, is that you only communicate to your own bubble. And regarding one of the biggest platforms, Facebook, most environment organizations are not even allowed to communicate on a global scale anymore. They shut our organization down the day after we launched our own platform. It's kind of absurd. So Cassie actually is onto the solution. We need to develop our own platforms in the climate field. We can't just use the existing ones. We need to do our own platforms to reach out bigger, not just communicate in our own bubble. Of course, we have to use the big social media platform, but if we are going to reach out, we need to be creative and build our own platform. And We Don't Have Time is one of those platforms where our users could get together and communicate directly with leaders. So we are encouraging having individuals talking to business leaders, governments, politicians, etc. And our whole business model is actually that we work with companies and organizations that wants that feedback, that wants that dialogue to happen. We don't do ads. We don't force you to buy anything you don't want. We encourage a dialogue. I think to answer your question, we need more platforms, and we need to reach people wherever they are digitally. Like this event. I mean, Corona has created a space of thousands of digital events for the climate, where we suddenly could get out of our bubble, because the physical events was kind of the usual suspect in the audience. Now you can meet new people. So I think we're on to something here, and it's only the beginning. And if not the big social media platform adapt, they will lose relevance. They can't be in the old world. They must change exponential into the climate field, or they will be replaced or irrelevant, is my opinion.
Interesting. And so do you think that we'll see the evolution of many dedicated platforms, and will they be, if you had to speculate on kind of how that ecosystem would evolve, how would you expect that they'll be organized, by country, or by what intersections of interests would make the basis for the platforms themselves?
Yeah, I'm absolutely convinced that what we're going to see in the digital social media field is more platform rising, not just about the climate, about a lot of things. And I mean, if you go to the cable TV, you don't have 3 channels in the world. You have a lot of media, you have a lot of newspapers. It's not really sound that we only have one platform to talk through. We need many platforms. So I think that is going to happen, and that is both a good thing, but it's also a challenge, because it will be even more problematic to get out of the noise. So I think what we're going to need and what we're going to develop is ways of communicating cross platforms and not focusing on the platform, more focus on the network where you connect and know people. Focus on how we human beings have created networks before internet. I mean, we always have created network, and now I think we need to create the networks no matter if they are on where you find the platforms. We're going to have different platforms for different means, but we were going to develop networks that is more crossover, and that is really beautiful that Cassie have created with the Mission 1.5, that you had ads in other games and you have this cross-platform where you reach 1.8 billion gamers. That's exactly how we need to do to get out there, because the big platforms out there, they work against the climate. I mean, I'm not just talking about the social media platform, I'm talking about the whole media. They're not covering this story. I mean, a little, but they're not covering the crisis. So if they don't do it, we must do it. And I think we will. And this has just get started and catalyzed through the Corona situation.
Great. I think I want to come back to Peter, just for some reactions to what's just been said before I go to the next question. Peter, you have any additional thoughts?
Well, I think it's very exciting sort of vision of multiple platforms serving very specific publics. And I think one of the parts of the conversation is, how do you galvanize action and more effective and rapid action within the climate community? And creating new platforms to do that, I think, is absolutely essential. At the same time, I think where we're slightly more focused is on systems change and trying to engage consumers outside of our bubble, and rather than creating just more bubbles, which I understand is a totally necessary thing to do. We're very interested in finding ways to leverage those mainstream platforms and to get the message out through those. So as an example, one of our clients was Arizona State University. They created an amazing documentary series called Carbon Cowboys, shot by a brilliant filmmaker called Peter Bick, originally from Louisville, Kentucky. And what it showed was farmers who were adopting regenerative farming practices, who were often Republicans and didn't really think about climate change. And what they tell is the story of improvements in their lives, which aren't to do with climate. They're to do with dealing with drought and the return of vegetation to dried out areas. And we launched that on Fox News, okay? Now, what happened then was an extraordinary conversation on social media where many, many Republican voters across America were jumping up and down saying, regenerative grazing is amazing. We've got to stop that. The Democrats are trying to stop us from doing this. And it may have been a crazy bubble that they were living in, but they were also living and breathing low carbon regenerative grazing. And so as much as I think it's important to create new platforms to rally the troops, to speed up the discussion, I think it's also very important to leverage these very powerful mainstream media platforms to get stories out that respond to people's everyday needs, but which carry subliminal messages of change, or even outright messages of change that help this movement.
Oh, thank you, Peter. That's really interesting. I want to kind of follow that up or extend it by asking a question that has two parts to it. One is, I think all of you have referenced this in one way or another. There are two sides to the climate story. There's a scary negative side and there's a positive solutions side. And communications in a way make some choices about which of those levers to engage and how to engage them. I'm interested in your reflections on that based on experience so far. That's the A part. And the B part is, so there are communication strategies to raise awareness and activate, consumers or agents one way or another. And there's a question about about connection. How does that connection lead to the influences or decision makers? And Cassie's program has a very clear way of bringing answer to both those questions, in a sense, to which parts to focus on and then how to map that or connect that to decision makers. But I just want to invite any and all of you to reflect more generally on what we've learned about those two. Ingmar?
Yes, very interesting field, I think. My experience is that on our platform, what we have created is for our users to give, they could send climate love to someone that is doing something great, to influence others to follow them, to encourage them to do more. But they can also send a climate warning to someone that deserves a warning, something they need to stop. And we have also a climate idea that is more or less, you should do this instead, like constructive. And when we launched this, we were really worried about that most people will give the warnings. And that will be a very negative if it's most warning. But in fact, ideas and climate love is about 75 to 80% of a user created content. So it's a great need for solutions, and people need to be educated about that we have the solution. We just need to implement it. But I think we can't only frame the discussion about the solution without be honest about what is at stake. So I think it's something about 20% problem, 80% solution is good, but we need to talk about the problems for real. We can't avoid that discussion. I think that's my experience.
Cassie?
Yeah, if I can add, I couldn't agree more with Ingmar. I think that, you know, for Mission 1.5, what we've been trying to do is focus on solutions, but also urgency. And this conversation around urgency, I think, speaks to exactly what Ingmar was saying, was that people have to know the stakes. And for so long, you know, we would talk about the stakes, but now people, I think, more so are seeing the stakes. And the wildfires in California are a good example of that. Some of the flooding that's happening in Uganda. There's a lot that's going on in the world that people are looking around and starting to make the connection that, oh, we had heard that we would get more increased and extreme storms, and now look, we have these hurricanes that are battering our coastlines and costing billions in recovery. And so I think that there's this way that that we can talk about that urgency, but then also being able to sort of to keep it real when it comes to solutions, that we do know what we have to do. It's just that we haven't done it at the scale that we need to be doing it now. And I think being able to drive that point home and being able to help people to be fluent in solutions, and I was looking at one of the participants in the Q&A who this idea that there's going to be one thing, or we just have to do this one thing, when it's actually a whole landscape of things that we have to do. A lot of different solutions have to come into place, and I think that we need to be sort of able to make that case in a clear way, so that everybody knows what these things are according to where they live and what they can advocate for.
Great. Peter, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that on the question of tone and positive and negative messaging, I think totally agree with Ingmar. You've got to have both. I think if we look at the movement over many years, it seems to me we've been very strong on awareness and scary facts, and that's convinced part of the public. But the reality is of the kind of systems-wide change that Cassie's talking about, which we all learned, so it was so beautifully presented on a digital platform called Project Drawdown. It was brilliantly presented, and we've known about it for years. But actually, really, if we're talking about urgent action today, it's really about activation, and doing that is really difficult. I mean, I'm very excited about in particular in the US, then we're starting to see very mainstream brands using their power to educate consumers about what is going on. There's a wonderful ad by Burger King about its Cows menu, it's called, which is aimed squarely at children and is educating them about how the new feed for their cattle is reducing farting in cows, reducing methane emissions. Now, we all know that that's a big problem, and probably the best solution is to switch to plant-based foods, okay? But really, if we're talking about urgent action, it's not just about dialogues with politicians. The private sector has to be engaged and supported to make this kind of scale of a change. And I think that Ingmar is also right that those platforms that don't have a climate message, that don't educate their consumers about what's required, that don't develop products and solutions that are cheap and accessible, then they will disappear. But we're already at that point. I think we can start focusing on that kind of activation. That's what digital platforms should be really focused on.
You know, Peter, I saw that ad based on your recommendation. It's quite a remarkable thing, and tells a story about, for one thing, it's so clearly focused on its target audiences, which is children, young people, and it's for sure a signal of that brand takes that messaging very seriously. So yeah, I just want to broaden that and ask if anyone else wants to jump in on this, because it's certainly on our minds of how to harness the power of corporate messaging and corporate brands, and also keep it honest, which I think is, you know, part of what we need to do. Any other comments on this?
I can say something. I totally agree with it, that the most needed action now are to influence others to follow and do things. And the organization that actually has this enormous power is global companies with billions of customers. Like IKEA, they have 1 billion customers they could educate. We have MasterCard on an event I'm a host of tomorrow. They have 5 billion customers. That's so enormous potential to educate people about the situation in the world and have them to understand it and do behavioral changes. So I think to influence others is super important, and the one that have that power must use it. And we individuals that don't have that power, we must demand that from the platforms that have the power. And my experience is that it doesn't take millions of people or thousands of people to have someone change. It could be enough with a couple of hundred people that are targeting someone and ask them to do something, not in like you're an idiot, but more like, can't you do this because we would like you to do it. So I think this is very important.
Yeah, and if I can add to that too, and I think as consumers also being aware of the companies that we are buying from, that you know, with IKEA, that IKEA is, you know, sustainability is so much a part of their value system, that, and being able to support companies that have that as an outward part of their value system, I think helps us to also sort of continue that feedback loop of supporting these companies and essentially rewarding them for having this as a part of their business. And then ideally, you know, those are the companies that are able to thrive. I also did want to say something. I haven't seen the Burger King ad. I really, really want to see this. But I think it's also really interesting, Peter, what you were saying about how it's aimed at children. That you know, the audience for that ad is kids, and I think that there's such an audience there, and as we are thinking about platforms and we're thinking about who's using these platforms, that, you know, kids and teenagers and young people being so tuned into the climate space and being able to help support that education and support that mobilization and that activism in a very meaningful way is something that I think we can all pay much closer attention to, because it's grown over time. It didn't used to be this way. And now it's quite a powerful force in the world for this action.
Yeah, thank you for those thoughts, Cassie. I want to encourage participants to please chat in questions that you have, and we'll turn to those. And while you're sending them in, I'm going to ask another question for the panel. The conversation we've just been having about the role of corporate agents, I think, of course, has two sides to it. You know, a positive side and a dangerous side of, you know, the corporate actors certainly have influence to shape the conversation and to shape our understanding of what's real out there. And one of our European colleagues recently shared with us some perspectives, including a list of the most shared bits of information on Facebook about climate in the last year or something, of which a number of the top 10 were outright misinformation. And interested in your thoughts about that, about how to push back or interact with misinformation that's so readily disseminated, you know, by the same tools that we're hoping to use for positive effect.
Peter mentioned trust. Trust is super important, and this is not easy to say because this will come with a price, but you can't trust Facebook, and that's a real problem, because if you can't trust the platform, you can't trust the information that you read there at all. So we must have Facebook change or get rid of Facebook. Facebook is a big showstopper regarding the climate. And not just Facebook, we also have YouTube. YouTube is distributing a massive amount of flat earth society, fake facts, climate denialism, and I don't know what. And for instance, my organization last broadcast with Christiana Figueres live was cut out by YouTube. They just censored it. They cut our stream. And I can understand that could happen by mistake or anything, but they don't even answer when we try to reach them and ask them, why did you cut out a climate stream about the situation in the world? They don't answer. I mean, we can't have that global platforms that totally ignores their users and the world. We need to have other infrastructure. And if they don't do it, we must replace them. I mean, they haven't existed for more than 20 years. So let's build something better. Let's build something greener, something more human. And that's important. But we have them, so we must use them because to reach people. And Peter's absolutely right. We need to use what we have now. We can't build a new society. We don't have time for that. We must use the society we have. And we need to persuade the ones in power and the businesses and organizations to change.
Peter, anything you'd like to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the social media platforms, which have revolutionized our lives and destroyed, you know, also had a malign effect on my old industry, the traditional media, which I think is very significant in this discussion. And I think that they will be regulated. But you know, remember the Arab Spring. If you have friends in places like Russia, Facebook is an absolute lifeline, okay? So it may be having deleterious effects in Western democracies, but it has had a very powerful effects in other countries. But I do think it will be regulated, and the capacity to use it for global campaigns for borderless, cheap communications may be reduced over time. So I think I echo Ingmar also, let's use it and use it to our advantage. On the question of disinformation, it's really shocking the stats that are coming out about, you know, counterfactual information being shared 6 times more often than actual factual information. And I think that the you know, one of the key things about leveraging these social platforms is to, you know, create content that is relatable and emotional. And this tradition of our movement to put out endless facts is not going to deliver the goods, I'm afraid. So we need to change that approach to messaging.
Yeah, and I think too that there's something here as well about back to this word trust, and I think also talking about trust when it comes to science. You know, there is a war on science now, and there is a war. I mean, I remember when, you know, IPCC reports would come out, and it was the discussion point was the content of those reports, not whether those reports were valid or not. And I think that there's been this evolution that is very apparent, and I think certainly we see this, you know, with Facebook and other platforms. I mean, because they're essentially an algorithm. I mean, they're pushing out content that people react to, and with that, you know, we start to see this war on science really take place. And you know, and Ingmar, I was watching We Don't Have Time when Christiana was all of a sudden it went blank. And you know, Christiana, who has been a tireless advocate for climate change and an incredible one, to see that for whatever reason to have it go out at that moment was really destabilizing, because you know, these conversations, we need to be able to have this sort of this element of trust, this element of sort of faith in the experts and the expertise that exists out there, in a way that we can continually reinforce. With Mission 1.5, you know, we feature sort of 6 major categories of sort of climate solutions. So, you know, energy, transport, nature, farms and food, green economy, and protecting people. And talking about what fit in those buckets took us months and months of time. And it was entirely dependent on IPCC, Project Drawdown, a number of academic institutions that we had known had been doing this research for a very long time. And even then, you know, when we launched it, it was, you know, we were like, we are rock solid here. And even then people would say to us, well, wait a minute, what, you know, why are you talking about, you know, a plant-based diet, or why are you talking about cleaner fueled planes? And this was something that it's because this science is being questioned in a way that I think we really have to start to be thinking about.
I want to turn to one of the questions from the participants, which says, what is the most surprising climate behavior on behalf of consumers that the panelists' digital platforms have exposed? Useful behaviors that can be scaled, as well as antagonistic behaviors. Any good examples?
You mean behavior in the digital space?
Yes.
Like
well, I think the question is going toward, you know, ultimately we're looking for behaviors that affect emissions. So maybe both. You know, certainly
I think
digital space may entrain others, and then
I would say Fridays for Future. That's the perfect example. You have those kids. I mean, it's not many people in every city, but with the help of social media, they connect with each other, and it will suddenly be this critical mass movement of millions of young people all around the world that are connected. But I mean, most of the manifestation are small groups of children, like 10, 20, 30 people, but they connect on the internet and cooperate and scale. So I think that is something many organizations, many activists and many actors could do the same. We don't need to be many people at one place at the same time, but we could be many people on many places. We could few people on many places and many people on the world doing the same stuff. And that is a really powerful thing. So conclude, use the digital platform and the physical world together. That's a good activist.
Yeah, I think that's, I actually, when I was a journalist yonks ago, and in Paris, I remember reporting on a school strike about the privatization of the university education system, and found it was actually the son of a British journalist who was organizing this school strike. But it's amazing what social media has done there with Fridays for Future, you know, encouraging people all over the world. The UK has never been much into strikes, but to get kids striking, it's unbelievable what's happening.
Sweden never strike. So,
incredible, it demonstrates incredible power of the combination of authentic, brilliant people saying something new and fresh, and using the power of the internet to communicate. So I think that's a very good example. But I do also think that one of the areas which I think is really important, again, going back to rather than just being about rallying political forces, I think, you know, getting people to switch. I think one of my favorite companies is called Bulb. I think it's only still in the UK, but it sells renewable electricity. And they've grown in a matter of a couple of years to having millions of subscribers in the UK from a tiny office in East London. And how did they do it? By making it really easy to switch using a digital platform. And it's not about convincing people to go and strike. It's not about convincing people to believe in climate change, or to think that solar panels are better than wind farms, or nuclear shouldn't be trusted. It's nothing to do with that. It's green is good. So if you like that, then join us. But the most important thing is the simplicity of the digital platform. So what you do is you photograph your electricity bill, you send it to Bulb, and then they quote you a cheaper price for your energy and make it green. And that is foolproof. And I think that's really what we talked about, state of the art at the beginning of this conversation. And I feel like that's where things have got to move, is like platforms that can pick up this interest in different topics and translate it into action online.
Yeah. And that's I mean, that's the business is going also. I mean, the climate is going to be as much disruptive as the whole digitalization has been to the business industry. So if you combine the digitalization with the climate, bang, you have something exponential that's going to change so many things. So I totally agree.
Yeah, you know, I'm struck by this. I mean, as Peter says, school strike has a universality of messaging, right? I mean, it's very, very simple message that, you know, may not make sense to spend my time in school if my future is at stake in ways that are more immediate than investing in school. And so in the spirit of this conversation of searching for what those universal kind of thematic and very powerful approaches can be, this is what leaders have always done. When Gandhi led the Salt March in India, you know, to lead India's independence movement, or the bus strike in Montgomery that Dr. King led, all of these touch something that has a universal and broadly based messaging. And I'm wondering, I want to start with Cassie on this, because we're very much aligned at, you know, from an analytic and science perspective, that Mission 1.5, that making a point about the significance of limiting climate change to 1.5 is profoundly important for the future of the planet, of human and otherwise. And yet sometimes we ask ourselves, is the 1.5 message too wonky to be the basis for, you know, for a broadly based movement? So I know you've already made a decision on that, Cassie. Yeah. I'm interested in your thinking and experience and reflections, you know, about it. I mean, we're on your team here, but also wonder a little bit about how to message it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure Peter is laughing, because I've spoken with Peter at length about, you know, Mission 1.5. Is it an opportunity to educate people about the importance of 1.5, that the number 1.5 essentially represents this threshold. And is this something that people need to know about? Or, as you said, James, is it too wonky? Is it too in the weeds? And is it a matter of, you know, kind of to also using what Peter was just saying, green is good, and then we just take it from there. And so it is a bit of an experiment for us. And what we have done with Mission 1.5 actually is really try to reinforce the 1.5. And so actually when you play the game, there's a thermometer, and the choices that you make, either you make the thermometer go up or down, and then you get judged at the game as if you if you kept temperature below 1.5 degrees, you win. If it goes above, you lose. And just keeping it very, very simple in that way. And actually, one of the things that I think the ways that we've also had to pivot because of COVID is because of so many more people staying home to learn, and parents having to teach their kids, that we started getting a lot of requests from parents and teachers saying, we've played this game, but we don't understand, why was this 1,000 points? And why was this 500 points? And what is 1.5? You know, and so what we actually did was now, and we're about to launch it, is we created a whole learning module that is associated with every single question within Mission 1.5. So when you get asked a question about protecting nature, and you start to look at, well, what does it mean to protect a forest? What does it mean to protect the ocean? That now we have an accompanying learning module that talks about each of those pieces in depth. And so we'll certainly keep you posted on this. And we do think it's worth people being very fluent in these solutions and being able to go beyond the calls for, we want something to happen, do something, do something, do something, that instead being able to say, and here's how we are envisioning our future, and here's what we are thinking about it. And 1.5 is a key part of that. So yeah, we'll keep you posted on how this goes, because it is an experiment. It's a teaching moment.
No, we're certainly hopeful you're successful with it, because it does create a kind of ground of truth, or context, or, you know, playing field to make, to assess what's significant or less significant. We come back to the Burger King example. Is 30% reduction in methane emissions from cows good enough, right? It's good, but at some level we do need to be saying, are we on track? And having a very serious conversation among all the stakeholders around that question of kind of 1.5C. So I see another question is just coming in on this. How can 1.5C climate actors better collaborate and raise an increasingly noisy digital narrative on climate change? There's definitely, you know, a set of powerful actors, from United Nations to Greenpeace to the raft of NGOs who are working independently and probably not as coordinated as we can be. So some of you might have thoughts on how we can better collaborate.
I think that one of the wonderful things about the environmental movement in combination with digital has been how much collaboration there has been. And Fridays for Future is a great example of that. I think that when you think about the different NGOs, one of our best experiences of this was on the topic of land use emissions. So my group recognized that there was a problem with the land emissions discussion at the UN climate talks. And so we brought together, supported by the Nature Conservancy, a group of actors, UN actors and NGOs, and researched messaging which enabled a more concerted effort which supported everybody's interests, and also crossed over to different countries and reached different groups. So I think that multi-stakeholder initiatives where you gather a group of NGOs and you find common ground It's painstaking, it's really, really hard work, but it can be very effective. The icing on the cake of that campaign, incidentally, was a video produced by Greta. So and George Monbiot, the journalist from the UK, about natural climate solutions, which was seen, hundreds of millions of times, and really galvanized the movement around nature-based solutions. So I think it can be done, and I think it's important work, but it's time-consuming and needs good levels of funding.
Ingmar?
I'm not sure I'm agree to 100% about that. The climate movement needs to coordinate everything, because we also, we need to coordinate about the problem that we need to solve this. But as we all know in this conversation, there's a lot of solutions out there, and it's hard even for experts to know exactly what solution we should implement. And I think we could join more people if the climate movement could be more open-less. Some people advocate nuclear, some people advocate only renewables, some people advocate natural solutions, some people advocate some crazy other solution, I don't know. But I think by opening up the climate space and have a much higher tolerance for different opinions about how to solve it, I think we could move forward and actually join more people. So we need to collaborate about working against the enemy. The fossil fuel interest, that's a common enemy. But I also think that we need to have tolerance for different views, because we need people voting for the Republicans, we need people voting for the Democrats, we need everyone to actually have an opinion about to solve this situation we are in. So I think we should collaborate about working, but we should tolerate many different views in that collaboration. And I think we're going there, but I think we could go there a little bit faster, actually.
Yeah, if I can also come in on this, I think this is also a moment of, we also need really good storytelling. Yep. We need storytelling about the impacts of climate change, about the solutions of climate change, about how this impacts things beyond sort of the green circle, and talking about, what does a cleaner, greener future mean for girls' education? What does it mean for human rights? And being able to make these types of connections that I think also help us to be able to see this as, as a way that we are charting our collective future. And I think that certainly, as we've been paying a lot of attention to the stimulus packages that countries have started to pass with COVID, and looking at, with the stimulus package, you pick winners and losers. You do. And looking at the winners and the losers that have been picked in those stimulus packages, in some cases, it's really alarming, because you're seeing an acceleration of fossil fuels. In other cases, you are seeing an acceleration of renewable energy. And those are just two examples of the many ways that these stimulus packages are evolving. And so I think also being able to say, okay, well, what can we rally behind? How do, kind of quoting Peter here, how do we keep it simple? And make sure that we are all moving in the same direction.
Well, we're just about to the top of the hour. I want to ask, this has been kind of a dark year, I think it's fair to say, between COVID and climate events and challenges around the world. I just want to ask each of you, what's the brightest spot you've seen in recent months as you think about kind of the path forward? What's given you encouragement?
I can go first. I've seen a lot of things actually this week with Climate Week. A lot of news from businesses that is doing climate action, and I see and also talk to many business leaders that talk about the climate as a climate activist. So the business community are slowly awakening, and more people are getting real action out of it. But so that's very positive. But I mean, we need so many more. So we need to scale that. But there is a positive core going on, and actually, I'm more and more convinced that if we're going to see another president in the U.S., I think that's going to release so much change. So that could be like turning things around for real, because things are building up, but we need to go over the tap so they explode in this action. But I see more and more action, and usually I work really hard to find good news about the climate, and it's really easy to find the bad news, but nowadays I got flooded by good news. I can't catch up, and that's a good thing.
Lots happening, yeah.
But it's not enough, of course, as you know.
Peter?
For me, it's definitely the announcement yesterday that China aims to be carbon neutral by 2060. That kind of caught me by, and I think a lot of people, by surprise. And it's an incredible signal, especially after the EU proposal to increase their ambition on emissions reduction.
Yeah, terrific. Cassie?
Yeah, and I agree with both of those. And I think another thing too that we are seeing, and certainly as at the UN, as we're looking at what recovery looks like when it comes to COVID, and what it looks like about building a greener future. I have been so struck by the level of young entrepreneurs that are starting green businesses. It is really overwhelming. We're getting contacted all the time by young people who are saying, I want to start this green business. And, you know, in the context of COVID, you know, being an entrepreneur is the way to go. And, you know, it has to be green. There's no question. And so this is something that I'm finding a great deal of hope with, that momentum is growing. And we're starting to see this happen in a really fantastic way.
Well, I'll add my own from the wonky side. We've seen just in the last 2 weeks major studies from the International Energy Agency, from DNVGL, a consultancy, and from BP, all that point to possible pathways to 1.5C. And these are the mainstream analysts who are starting to come toward seeing the tipping points that are possible to open the doors to get us there. So there's a lot of interesting signals across the board. I think we're all excited about the possibility of dramatic change in the years to come, and doubling down to make sure it happens. So I want to thank our panelists. This has been a fascinating conversation, and I think there's no question that this domain of using digital tools in innovative ways is going to be a key part of the solution. So more power to you, and let's stay in touch and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us. Really interesting topic and productive discussion.
Yeah.
Likewise.
Thank you so much for hosting. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, James.
Bye.
Bye.